Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dorman Ventures. Today, I'm joined by Israel Oyedare, the founder of Teens and Youth in Leadership, or otherwise known as TYIL, an organization dedicated to developing young people into value-driven, purpose-centered leaders through education, mentorship, and real-world leadership experiences with a focus on impact that extends far beyond any single venture. In this episode, we dive into what it really means to found something for the sake of giving back. We talk about how mission-driven ventures start, how they grow differently from traditional startups, and the unique challenges that come with choosing purpose before dollar signs. Israel also shares how this mindset shapes decision-making, sustainability, and long-term impact. We also zoom into leadership itself, asking the big questions like, can leadership be taught, learned, or built over time? Israel breaks down the core traits of effective leaders and how those traits apply specifically to founders, especially student founders who are learning to lead teams, communities, and really just industries while trying to figure out themselves at the same time. And so, if you're a founder looking to deepen your passion for your craft before chasing the dollar signs, and someone who wants to grow into a strong, intentional leader, not just within your startup, but within your team, your community, and your broader industry, this episode is for you. All right, enough said. Let's dive right in. Hope y'all enjoy. Israel, thank you so much for hopping on Dorman Ventures. Really excited to have you on. I think this is a very unique episode. We were just talking about this before the show, but a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, success for those spaces are defined by how much money you make. But for you, obviously, it's very different. And I'm really excited to get this conversation moving forward.
Thank you so much, Zaki. I'm excited to see where this conversation would go. I look forward to sharing my story as well.
Of course, I appreciate it. And just like you mentioned, you have a very, very interesting story. Starting with that, can you tell us a little bit about, walk us through your background, where you grew up, where your early experiences were like, and kind of how you came to where you are now, and also how you built TYIL, and talk a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, so I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and I am the first son, the first child of three children, and I grew up in a suburban environment. And growing up for me was quite smooth because I had a parents who were present, and I also had an opportunity to learn about sociocultural values that much more that Africa is affiliated with. So as a young child, my parents taught us how to serve the community, how to go the extra mile in ensuring that we don't just get value for what we're doing, but then other people actually receive value for being affiliated with us. So I think that actually made me develop the foundation for thinking about other people first before myself. While I was a kid, I think while I was in high school, myself and my siblings started a business because we just wanted to practice the act of doing business. So we would save, and after a period of time, we would buy some pencils and pen and sell to students. And, we weren't receiving any profit, but we enjoyed the act of just, trying things and just helping people, get things rather than going out of the school, but then buying things from the classes. Then we moved to writing books. So I remember as a kid, as a youth, we would write books and we would sell these books to our classmates. And we did it for a couple of times until someone discouraged us. The person promised that they were going to help us print the book, and till tomorrow they never printed the book. So we're still waiting for the person. Perhaps if they get back to us with the printed book, we'll get back to writing together. But then I've gone on to author a book. I've gone on to also author many peer-reviewed journals. And I think another experience I can remember about growing up was when, I just discovered my knack for helping people discover who they truly are, helping people, grow as talented individuals. So I had lots of classmates who were very talented, even some of them more talented than myself. And, but many of them didn't really understand how to use their talent. So from a young age, I would reach out to some of my friends and, inspire them to pursue what they were, interested in doing, to change what they were doing into something that was profitable, something that was helpful to other people. And, it was extremely rewarding for me because learning about the act of helping people see who they truly who they truly are, was something that my parents made sure that we developed as young children. Um, so I moved into college, and from college, I started teaching. I started teaching from church, but I discovered that teaching was effortless for me. I discovered that empowering people and helping them see their identity and understanding who they truly are was effortless. So, in college, I could spend hours teaching and teaching, not teaching technical subject, but just helping people see that you can actually do this. You can actually pursue your vision. You can actually make do with what you want to do with your life. So that metamorphosed into starting my nonprofit. I started my nonprofit out of college after college. And the nonprofit was just to help people grow and to explain leadership. I usually say, no, I have a PhD in leadership studies, but I usually say that I started teaching about leadership from before I had a master's degree. So then what I would do was to share my leadership experiences and, my experiences working across teams, and I wouldn't share anything theoretical. And that experience for me has continued to be rewarding.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's an amazing story. And it sounds like kind of like every part, every step of the way built your path into what you're doing now, which is really, like you said, teaching people how to, become the best version of themselves with all the potential they have, and also, creating new leaders, right? And that's really what you do at
Absolutely.
TYIL. It's
Absolutely.
teenagers and youth in leadership, correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we did there.
That's amazing. And so, in that space, teenagers and youth in leadership, I'm curious, before it existed, what problem were you personally, noticing with young people or just leadership that felt unresolved to you, that kind of prompted you to say, listen, this is a problem that I want to solve?
Yeah, so I grew up, in a community where I saw a lot of children make wrong decisions. I saw a lot of people who, didn't have, didn't have parents who were educated. I myself, I'm a first generation, um, I'm a first generation child, and you know, I grew up in an environment where people didn't really understand what it is to want to really do something beyond yourself. So it was normal to see people, trying to do things for a short-term gain, trying to making decisions that won't outlive them, that won't be long-term. So that was a problem I saw in my immediate community. But in a more holistic perspective, I saw that, I came from a country where we are blessed with lots of mineral resources, lots of, in fact, intellectual resources, but then things were not progressing. And it was because people were not seeing they were not being empowered enough. They were not being supported enough. They were not, they didn't have enough, facilities and infrastructures to help them grow as individuals and leaders. And that was a problem that I saw. And I thought that, oh, if things would change, then it has to change with the person and not just the system. It has to change with how we define leadership. It has to change with how we take personal responsibility for growth and development. And all of these things will cascade into national development. So I would say that my rationale, my motivation to founding TYI was because I saw that, there were lots of young people within my community who didn't have the resources to learn and to develop, or they didn't have the information to learn and to develop. And I also saw that it was not just my community problem, it was also a national problem. And if we're going to progress as a country, we needed to start with individuals. We needed to start with ensuring that people have the right perspective towards leadership development.
Definitely. Yeah. And, the idea of teaching basically a whole new generation about leadership and how to be better leaders sounds like a very, very big task. I'm curious, how do you go about doing that? What do you guys do at TYIL? How do you build that next generation of leaders?
Yeah. So at TYL, like I mentioned earlier, we specialize in raising young transformational leaders who would occupy every sector of Africa by 2050. And how we do this is through leadership education. We develop leadership education curriculum to ensure that, youth take advantage of and are exposed to certain leadership theories, certain leadership ideologies that will elevate them. We also make sure that we support youth by providing them with facilities and materials and tools to, to take their vision from being an idea to, something that they can actually exhibit or something that they can actually, practice. So that is what we basically do. And funny truth is the funny story is that I stayed in Nigeria for over 27 years, and I ran TYL for about 5 years before I left Nigeria, and I've experienced growth in TYL. You know, yeah, I've experienced more growth in TYL since I arrived in the United States 4 years ago compared to while I was in Nigeria. So it showed that I myself I'm going through some development myself. But what we try to do is to make sure that every growth that every of my team member experiences, that we try to incorporate it into TYL structure. We don't want any student, we don't want any beneficiary to lack anything. So if I learn anything in my PhD level, the next thing I'm thinking is, how does this apply to youth in Africa? How does it apply to, the nonprofits organization in Africa?
Hmm. Hmm. And so, how do you operate through that level of teaching? Do you do lectures, workshops?
Yeah. So we do intensive trainings. Our trainings are free, and we've been operating at this rate, like free rate, since we started the nonprofit. But what we do is that we make sure that our trainings are within 4 to 6 weeks. So we don't have a 1 day training. We don't have a workshop. We do intensive mini MBA trainings where we invite facilitators from around the globe, around the world, to come teach Africans who would not have the opportunity to learn from people. So we've been opportune to have facilitators from Virginia Tech, from the University of Southern Maine. We've had facilitators from Harvard University. So what we're trying to do is just provide opportunities to youth, youth who can't afford to travel abroad for leadership education. We're giving it to them. And what we also do is that, we make this opportunity available to both high school students and college level students. So it's not just, college level students. We go to those who are younger and we give them this exposure as well. And so far we have done it across, multiple countries. We've done it in Nigeria, we've done it in the Gambia, Tanzania. We've had programs in Ghana as well. And our online programs are readily available for college level students across Africa.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm not surprised you guys have seen so much success. It sounds like something very valuable and needed. And something you mentioned, I really want to kind of discuss and highlight the idea that from day one, you focus on this being something free. And that kind of segues perfectly into kind of the first main, topic of discussion I really want to talk about. What makes this episode unique is, the idea that this is founding for something bigger. This is you founding something for the sake of giving back, right? For you, how important was it from the beginning that this is something that is free? This is something that is more than just you getting money behind it.
Yeah, Zaki, as you may already know that, the next big thing is, edtech, education, technology, and we have a lot of potential to monetize TYL. In fact, if we say we are monetizing, like if we decide to monetize TYL, I know how much we'll get in doing that. But I think for me, my personal motivation has been that, while I was younger, I didn't have the opportunity to learn from people like this. I didn't even know what I know now. And I didn't want to deprive a coming generation, particularly those who can afford it, that opportunity. And so for me, that has been the motivation that I need to make sure that it is affordable to a young people, to a young person, it's affordable to a young person in Africa, to a young person in the area I grew up from, to a young person who hasn't started working. So, so that for me has been the motivation to make sure that, I just want to help people. And the truth is, the ROI I receive, the return on investment we receive, and the transformed lives, the lives of people who have gone through the trainings and have ended up, transforming other lives. So, we have seen the impact of TY, achieve ripple effect. For example, we have, someone from Tanzania who, went through the TY fellowship, and, now she's doing amazingly well in Tanzania. She has started a mentorship program for women in tech, and she's doing very well. We have someone who went through the fellowship in Nigeria, and they've started their own organization, their own company, and the company is actually producing product that's innovative product that is transforming the health sector in Nigeria or Africa. And finally, a very important story I really must tell was when is a story of a young guy who went through our program when he was in his last year, in his senior year during high school. And, he went through the program in 2019 and now he's done with college. He's a graduate, and during his program, during his college level, he was involved in student government leadership, student government leadership, and he was doing very well in his college level. And now he's doing even better. He's holding talks, he's inspiring the coming generation, and he attributes many of his successes to the early experience he received from TYIL. So that's our goal. Our goal is to make sure that, we don't just get profit, like we don't get profit, financial profit, but then we know that, we want transformed life. That's our goal. That's our mission, to see that, we raise transformational leaders. And, looking back, like if we look back years from now, we should say that, oh, these are people that have gone through TYIL fellowship program and they're doing exceedingly well in what they have chosen to do.
Wow. So that's the ROI. The ROI is more of the growth that you see in someone. That's fantastic. And I can
Yeah.
imagine that's a way better feeling and more long-term, benefit
Yeah.
than just, getting a
Yeah.
quick profit.
Exactly. To be honest with you, there has been temptations to want to monetize.
Of
There has been
course.
temptations to monetize, particularly when you know the value of what you put into the program. You know how much annually we spend. Um, tens of dollars. Having these programs across multiple countries, and you know that many of this money comes from donations from people, comes from donation from yourself. So you naturally want to think about monetizing all of these things, but then you also think about, okay, so can the people that you want to reach out to afford it? Like, can they afford it? Like if you say, yeah, if you monetize it, you will get another audience. But then our audience, we want our audience to be those who can't afford it.
Right. Definitely. And that actually kind of goes into the next point I wanted to bring up. A lot of our listeners, they're people who want to start a nonprofit or they want to even start a venture in a company that makes money, but still they stick very closely to the values behind them. As someone who's been in the world of nonprofits, I completely understand what you're saying. The idea that the temptation is there. When you grow and you have opportunities to monetize. I'm curious, how do you personally, keep your focuses on the quality of what you're doing and, you don't compromise that quality just because of money that may be able to flow in?
Yeah, so I'm going to jokingly say have board members who are rich, because if you have board members who are rich, you won't think of monetizing. But that's a joke. I think for me, it's just always going back to the drawing board. Like frequently, I make sure that I go back to why I started, why I know things change. I know organizations grow. But as organizations grow, there then comes the opportunity to compromise, right? So, what the thing I just did is just to go back to the drawing board and, ask myself questions. Why did I start TYL? Like if I monetize this, is it gonna be worth it on the long term? How would I feel? Personally, I feel that if I start monetizing TYL, then the motivation for me to continue what I'm doing will reduce, because then I know that, oh, I'm seeing profit in it. I'm not saying those who are doing things for profit are not doing the right thing. I'm just saying personally, my values for TYL would not just align with monetizing TYL. I can start another organization and monetize my skill. I can monetize my educational offerings, but then I don't think for TYL we were actually, we started for monetizing purpose. The second thing that has helped me has been having good people advise me. So my wife, for example, I run most of my ideas by her, and particularly in terms of monetizing things. And and when I go to her, she just reminds me and says that why you started, and I just for some reasons I just the reminder just comes generally. And the last thing I would say is having the right board members, those who would support you. I know. So because I have lots of people who advise me. There's a particular man called John Dooley. I went to meet him, and one day I asked him a question: what should you look out for in a board member? And he said board members are supposed to help you with resources or help you with money. That's the basic truth. If they don't have the money, if they don't have the resources, they should actually point you to where you can get the resources. So, yeah, so that has been very helpful. We've had supportive board members who ensure that we don't lose focus.
Definitely. So it sounds like in order to stay true to your mission and not have it be compromised, you not only need to have, the values sit at your core, but you also need people who can support that around you as well.
Absolutely.
Definitely, I can
Absolutely.
imagine. I can imagine, and
Absolutely.
talking about the idea of support, you know, I want to hear a little bit about, how you and, your board members and really everyone that was involved kind of started TYIL. Like, how was it in the beginning stages of building it out? Was it easy? Was it hard?
It was tough.
I can imagine.
It was tough, to be frank with you. Well, at the moment we have 13 team member, and we have I think we have 6 board members. So we have 19 people who are associated with TYL in terms of board membership and team membership. Now, emphasis on team member. I didn't mention employees, and that's because most of the people working to make sure that TYL grows are doing it from a volunteering perspective. So many of them are professionals in their fields, in their respective fields. So they work in the weekends, they work during their spare time. So there is no obligation to pay staff. There is no obligation to pay people who are working. But in the beginning, it was not so. Just like the Bible says, like in the beginning, it was not so. It was very tough. I started right from college. I didn't have a job at the moment at that time. I didn't have the financial resources. I was looking for free space. There was a time where we got a free space and we're kicked out. And I was so sad. I was so concerned. I didn't know what to do. And, just by faith and courage, I went to a particular, um, hall and I requested how much they were going to charge to host us per hour. And the money was about maybe $5. $5 was a lot for me then because I didn't have a job. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a source of income. I still went ahead to doing that. And we stayed in that particular place for 1 year. I remember many people left because they were wondering why I would rent a place when we didn't have the money to do so. So, those were the only experiences. I had team members who were not responsive. I had people who were not supportive of the idea. But then along the line, I discovered that if people see the actual results, if people see that you as a leader, you're not demotivated, they would end up following you. And right now, the best thing that I do the best way I win people to join my team is just to show them track record of 8 years, and tell them that if you would like to be a part of this, you're welcome. And many of them join. That doesn't mean that we accept everybody. We don't accept everybody. We accept only those who we know that are passionate and skillful. Now, the approach that I have followed over the years is not to look for someone with the skill alone. Because I have had experience of going for someone with a skill, but then they didn't have the commitment. So what I look forward to, or what I look for in team members, is you have a passion, you have a commitment, then we train you, even if you don't have the skill. If you have the skill, good for us, but I train you to making sure that you are a better person, such that if you decide to leave TYL today as a team member, you'll be of value to another organization you go to. And that's possible because I started TYL doing everything. I did content, I did program planning, I did finance, I did everything. I did fundraising. So then I didn't have a job. I would go to companies. I would go to companies and send letters. I would send it, and many of them said no. But then I just enjoyed that process, such that today anyone who comes into my nonprofit and doesn't have experience of fundraising, I can mentor them on how to raise funds, how to write grants. And these things were ultimately beneficial to me while I was in my PhD. I was able to combine so many things during my PhD program. So I would say at the early stage of TY, I learned certain skills. I learned skills that are still very relevant to me to date. I learned skills that are easily transferable. And I learned to, my leadership metamorphosed over time from being independent to being interdependent.
I see. Independent to interdependence. That's a really good point. You know, one thing that's really interesting that you mentioned is the idea of how important it was for you in building a team, for you yourself to be a motivated individual and to show that. There's interesting study, historical study that looked into successful generals versus unsuccessful. And it showed that the majority of generals who were successful were the ones that led on the front lines, while the remaining ones who were unsuccessful were the ones who stayed behind while the rest of their army fought. And I think that kind of attests to some similarity here. The idea that when you see a leader who is motivated, when you see a leader who, wants to actually lead, you yourself as a team member feel more inclined to do the same thing. And so I could imagine that that has taught you a lot on its own when making TYIL. But stepping into more of like the second part of this episode, right? Talking all about leadership because that's what you guys do there. You know, what are some of the biggest things that TYL has taught you personally about leadership?
That's a very good question. I think the biggest lesson I have learned from TYL is the power of process. The power of making sure that number one, you document process. Number two, you also ensure that you 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 qualify process. What I mean is that you make sure that processes are of good quality, not just the end products. So if you're going to be planning a program from the get-go, from the day one, you are making sure that you do it in a qualitative, in a standard way. And the third has been making sure that you 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 appreciate the process that you have gone through. I've made reference to you about I've made reference to when I started TYL and how that, you know, the process wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but I was able to tell the story because I have it documented. I have it documented somewhere. And I can't wait to tell the entire world. So, processes help us in leadership. Processes help you to appreciate people. It helps you to appreciate every resource you have. It helps you to judiciously make use of them. And that has gone through. That's even impacted every aspect of TYI. For example, our finance. We make sure that if we get a grant, for example, today, we we we, we treat that grant as though that's the only money we're going to have. So if the grant is supposed to be for 1 year, we're thinking of how we can make use of that money for about 3, 4 years. We're thinking of how, yeah, we can complete the project in 1 year, but how can we then have times 3 of this project? Say, for example, you get a grant of $10,000 and it's for a climate change project for 1 year. We're thinking, okay, how can we make this climate project 3 years while using the $10,000? So that is how we think. That's what process, learning about process has helped us because we have known that we have gone through the time where we didn't have money. Now we have some resources. Then we have to be judicious about it. We are a non-profit organization, but we think like a for-profit organization. We think about, oh, okay, so what are potential ways of getting money in? Well, maybe we don't have money in. How can we manage what we have? We don't have a lot of expenses. Most of our expenses are expenses on programs, and we make sure that we judiciously use these resources.
That's fantastic. You know, I think that's really interesting. There's a book by a man named Ryan Holiday, and it's called Ego is the Enemy, and he talks a lot about how sometimes passion uh can be a bad thing, and that sometimes you need to focus more on purpose over passion. And one thing that I think is really interesting about nonprofits, just like yours, just like TYL, is that when you do it, you're not so much focused on the money, you're more focused on the impact that you make. You're more focused on your purpose. And that way you're able to operate with a lot more clear headedness, with a lot more, like you mentioned, a process based thinking. And, I think that shows exactly in practice here. You know, Now after looking at how you've learned leadership, kind of stepping into you being someone who teaches as a leader, I guess you're a leader teaching leadership in a way.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
do
yeah.
you would you say that leadership is something that can be built or taught, or would you say it's something that's
Mm.
naturally just part of someone?
So, first of all, I need to clarify that there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between leadership in practice and leadership in research. In fact, you could teach leadership, you could teach the theories of leadership, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be the best leaders. Um, so I wanted to establish that. I also want to establish that, teaching leadership over time, yeah, you would understand how to consult. You would have the bed view of leadership scenarios, but then it doesn't bed eye view, sorry, of leadership scenarios. But then it doesn't mean that when you get into that place of leadership, you will lead well. So these are two things that I've learned in TYIL. So when I learn about leadership in college, in my PhD level, when I read about leadership, I try to practice it in TYL. And based on my experiences, I don't think, I know you can teach about leadership. You can teach about leadership, but to teach someone leadership is going to be very difficult because you could sit in a classroom and teach leadership, learn about the theories of leadership. But when you get to practice, you may not be able to practice it. But this is something that many teachers have done well, which is including or incorporating certain activities like role play, simulations, case study, discussion-based classes to make sure that, students don't just learn about the theories of leadership, but they practice it within the classroom. I think while I was at Virginia Tech, I supported a professor to facilitate a class, to teach a class on leadership. And what we did was to look for organizations, non-profit organizations within Blacksburg to make sure that these students, serve as volunteers during the learning of leadership. So we're teaching them we're teaching them, theoretical leadership. And yeah, it was a 2 week, like it was a class that they needed to come on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So on Tuesdays, they come to class, they learn about the theories of leadership. On Thursday, they go to, where they're volunteering. Then the following Tuesday, when they come, we talk about what they are volunteering in aligns with the theory that they had learned. And at the end of the semester, they present to the class. So that is an approach that people and, professors have incorporated into learning about leadership that makes it easy to practice and internalize leadership. So what I would say is you can teach about leadership, but you will need to learn leadership. Leadership can be learned. And leadership is learned by practicing.
Interesting. So sounds like you can build leadership, but it has to really, it has to be through practice. This reminds
Yes.
me, I had a podcast episode back, I believe it was almost a year ago, with Kevin Tupper. And one thing he mentioned, he said, you can't learn how to ride a bike at a seminar. You can't, these sort of things you need to be put into the real world. You need to learn how to practice it. And so that makes a lot of sense. I could only imagine. And it's great that, at TYL, you guys understand and focus on that. I could only imagine, I've taken some leadership classes at university or outside of it. And it may be sometimes it's just through a seminar, you read a textbook and there's not much to it. So it's great to see that that's something that this new step is
Yeah.
taking forward through the programs like
Yeah.
TYL.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to working with students, you know, and this is really important because a lot of our listeners who are student founders, they really seek to be leaders as they grow, right? Not only just for their startup, but also for their future life, right? There's so many places where you need to be a leader for yourself and for others. And so, what traits do you consistently see in young people, in your students, who end up, growing into strong leaders, regardless of their background?
Yeah. So I believe that when it comes to leadership, particularly business leadership, for young people, a trend that I have observed is that many of the young people start out um independently. So you have a skill and you have a social idea, and the next thing you want to do is to build a product, and you're doing it all by yourself. I believe that what will stand out for young people particularly those who want to build something that years after years they will be proud of, is collaboration. I believe that, yeah, you could have the skill, but then look for someone within your classroom, look for someone within your space who has a complementary skill that can support you. Seek to grow together with another person rather than growing alone. So when I started TYL as a young boy in my twenties, early twenties, I I looked for people who I believed, I could trust, people who I believed had skills, people who I believed that when I was disappointed, when I was discouraged, you know, they would call me back, and till date, I still have one of them on the team. Two of them left in good time because they got busier, and I had to just, have the honest conversation with them, letting them know that we have grown over time and, it's okay if they leave. Yeah. So, but I think that one skill that would be very helpful is, making sure that you have a smart eye to sense someone who can collaborate with you. So a good case scenario is maybe you have someone who has an idea to change to change the face of education. Maybe they want to build an ed tech. They want to build a technology that would help education easily accessible, or people easily access certain tools. Yeah, you can have the technical skill to develop it, but I would think that I would advise that you look for someone else who may have the communication skill or the marketing skill that can team up with you, such that while you're building, the person is talking about it. And look for someone else who is a good graphic designer, such that when you're building, the person is, designing the graphics and there's another person who is marketing. And this is why. It is not because I don't think you should receive the glory at the end of the day. It is not because I don't think that, working independently would not be good. But if you want to build something sustainable, you need people. If you want to build something that would outlive you, you need people.
Definitely. Yeah, and the idea of finding someone who complements you, doesn't always have to match you, but complements you
Yeah.
is really, really valuable.
Yeah.
And
And yeah,
go
exactly.
ahead.
I'm gonna say that if you're gonna invite people to join you, be ready to get disappointed, be ready to be ready to have people leave you, be ready to have people say no. So it comes with its own risk.
Right. I could imagine. And in that space, when it comes to bringing someone onto your team, it can be very risky. If they end up being someone who doesn't care enough, that can end up kind of derailing everything. And so for you, right, you mentioned having that eye for, the people you bring on. What is probably the most important thing you look for, you know, in a person that makes you say, okay, this is someone I want to bring on, or instead say, this is someone I would rather, not bring on the team.
Yeah, so I think for me, like I mentioned earlier, uh passion, commitment. But more importantly, consistency. I thrive on consistency actually, because Zaki, there is nothing I haven't tried on TYL. There is nothing I haven't tried on TYL. I have developed magazines for TYL, developed great things for TYL. But why I was able to do it then was because I just knew that I needed to be consistent. I needed to come to be so if someone desires to come to my team, the first thing I'm looking at is, are they consistent enough? So when you join my team, the first few months, I'm observing you, and I'm working with you, but then still observing if you would be here on the long term. Yeah, and they are very great people who have actually demonstrated that they're currently on the team. So that's one thing I look out for. Besides being passionate, you have to be consistent. If you're gonna be doing something every month or every week, make sure that you have a calendar, like you have it planned. So yeah, maybe I haven't mentioned this before, but if you're gonna have a program in the next 6 months, make sure that you start planning for it even 6 months prior. So that is how I work, and that is how I encourage my team members to work.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, that's a really great point. That can help a lot of our listeners that are, just starting these long-term, ventures or nonprofits, and it involves them looking down the line and bringing people on. I think that's really, really valuable. And so, Israel, as we close off today, I have a few really key questions that kind of I've been kind of itching to ask, right?
Okay.
At first, so the first one is, if a college student, right, coming out of college, just like you were before you started TYL, really wants to start something for the sake of giving back, right? Regardless if there is, some finances or some monetary gain or not, uh, you know, what would be the first step you tell them to take?
I think I would say read a lot, read a lot, read a lot. So, Zaki, I so in Nigeria where I'm from, after your college, you have 1 year of national service where you join a paramilitary, not military, but then it's pseudo military. You join them and you serve the country, and people who do that, are posted to different places, but it's usually a time to relax and rest. So you know after college, I didn't start immediately. I started 1 year later. But the space between completing college and starting to where I was doing my NYC. So, I would read at least 3 books a month, and they were books on leadership. I would listen to sermons. I would listen to, yeah, I'm a Christian, so like we call it sermon. I'll listen to messages on leadership. I'll listen to audio recordings on leadership, and so when I was done with my service year, I felt I was ready to start. But that didn't mean that I experienced, that didn't mean that everything was smooth. But for me, I just enjoyed the fact that I had learned, I had dedicated 1 year to learning about that subject I felt I was called to actually do, to actually speak about. So I would encourage anybody who wants to start out to read, consume materials, look for mentors, learn, learn
Hmm.
learn a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine that's the key to everything, right? It's knowledge,
Yeah.
knowledge in general. And then another question, and this one's kind of a tough question. I don't even know if it's possible to do this, but if leadership could really be taught in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
That's a tough question.
Uh, yes, exactly.
So one sentence.
Can it be taught in one sentence? Is that something even
Yeah,
possible?
yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I have thought of, like, it's something that you can. Okay, so um eh, leadership scholars will tell you that it's very important to have a personal ideology about leadership. So my personal ideology for leadership is, making sure that you take people from where they are to where they could be, not where they want to be, but where they could be. Meaning that if you're a leader, you are saying that this person could actually be something greater than who they are, and you're helping them to get there. So the person you're helping to get there may not have even identified, where they want to get to. But as a leader, you're just helping them to get to where they could be. Yeah.
See.
So that's my personal definition for leadership.
Well, that's really nice. That reminds me of this idea. It's called like the Michelangelo effect or the Michelangelo theory. And it's the idea that, a good leader, a good person in someone's life is someone that can see the potential in another person and push them to that. You know, it's kind of stems from the idea that Michelangelo, the artist and sculptor would look at, a block of marble and he would see the potential of what could be made from it. So it's very similar to the idea that you're mentioning. Oh, that's a
Mm.
really, I didn't personally think when I first made that question that there'd be an answer to, but looks like there is. That's
Now that's a
amazing.
very tough question. Thank you
I can
for
imagine.
asking.
Yeah. Well, Israel, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate this is some amazing insights. We've never had an episode with someone, where they're working on a nonprofit. And it obviously shows that there are very different dynamics than a simple venture that I think someone who even wants to start any startup could benefit from. So I really appreciate your time here today.
Thank you so much, Zaki. I enjoyed speaking with you. You're such a bright man, and I've also learned enough from listening to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Likewise to you as well. Hopefully one day I'll be able to become such a good leader like yourself.
Oh, well, I hope to become a better leader as well, like you.
I appreciate it. That's great. We have this. That's great. Awesome. Well, Israel, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. That's it for my conversation with Israel. And per usual, before we close out, I want to leave you all with a few key takeaways. First off, always look back to your roots. As Israel shared, there will be moments where you're tempted to compromise what you're building for the sake of quick financial gain. When that happens, you have to pause and ask yourself why you started in the first place. Will this decision help you grow what you set out to build with integrity, or will it slowly chip away at the very reason it exists? Listen, more often than not, these short term compromises don't just hurt sustainability, they undermine the mission entirely. Second, leadership can be taught, but it can't be learned without experience, right? This was mentioned all the way back almost a year ago in an episode with Kevin Tupper, where he mentioned you can't learn how to ride a bike at a seminar. The same applies to leadership. Classes, books, and frameworks matter, but at some point you have to step into the arena, take on responsibility, feel uncomfortable, and just learn by doing. That's where real growth happens. Lastly, leadership isn't about authority or telling people what to do. As Israel puts it, a great leader is someone who can take people from where they are to where they could be, not always where they think they want to be. At the core of leadership is the ability to see potentials in others and help them unlock it. That means understanding what someone is capable of becoming and guiding them there, even when the path isn't easy or obvious. All right, that's all for this week's episode. If any of you are interested, I've attached Israel's LinkedIn and more info on teens and youth in leadership in the show notes below. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in, and until next time, this is Dorm Room Ventures.